Hi, everyone. Tonight we are going to talk about something that sounds impossible. A time when humans came so close to disappearing that history almost forgot it ever happened. You don't need to analyze anything, you don't need to remember names or dates. Just let the story move slowly like a quiet river in the dark. Long before cities filled the land, before roads connected places, before the world felt crowded or loud, humans were few. So few that if you could stand above the earth and look down, you might not notice them at all. Small groups moved across wide landscapes, not nations, not kingdoms, just families, just fires glowing faintly in the night. The world was colder then, harsher, unpredictable, ice covered vast regions, winds cut through open land. Seasons did not behave the way they do now. Sometimes winter stayed too long, sometimes summer barely arrived. Food was never guaranteed. One failed season could decide everything. People followed animals, they followed rivers, they followed memory, and sometimes memory failed. What few don't realize is that during this time, the entire human population may have dropped to a number smaller than a modern stadium, not millions, not hundreds of thousands, just a fragile thread of life spread thin across the planet. There was no announcement, no sudden collapse, no moment where anyone said humans are almost wiped out. It happened quietly. A colder climate reduced food. Scarcity weakened bodies. Weakened bodies welcomed disease, and disease moved faster than people could understand it. Illness didn't arrive like a storm. It drifted in slowly, from camp to camp, from breath to breath. People rested when they could. When they couldn't, they kept moving. Children were born into uncertainty. Some survived, some didn't. Life continued, but thinner each season. At the same time, the land itself was changing. Volcanoes altered the sky. Ash dimmed the sun. Temperatures fell further. Plants struggled. Animals migrated or vanished. And humans followed, sometimes too late. Imagine waking each day not knowing if food would be found, if the weather would turn, if the group would remain whole by nightfall. There were moments when silence lasted too long, when fires burned lower than usual, when footsteps grew fewer. Entire groups disappeared without a trace, not through violence, not through war, but through slow, quiet loss. And yet, there was no panic. Humans did not rush. They adapted. They shared what little they had. They stayed close to warmth. They learned which paths were safer, which seasons demanded patience. Those who survived did so not by strength, but by flexibility. They changed what they ate. They changed where they moved. They changed how they lived. And slowly, almost invisibly, the decline stopped. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just less loss, fewer empty places around the fire. Births balanced deaths, groups stabilized, paths became familiar again. The danger passed without ceremony, without anyone noticing how close the end had been. Thousands of years later, scientists would look back at genetic evidence and realize something unsettling. Human diversity was unusually low, as if the entire species had once passed through a narrow gate, a bottleneck, proof that there had been a moment when humans nearly vanished from the earth. And yet, here we are, not because of power, not because of dominance, but because of quiet endurance, because humans learned how to wait, how to adjust, how to survive without needing control. This was not a story of triumph, it was a story of continuation, a reminder that survival does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like patience, like silence, like one more night by the fire. And as the world slowly warmed again, as food returned, as paths widened and groups grew, humans moved forward, carrying no memory of how close they had come to disappearing. Let that thought rest with you for a moment. No urgency, no fear, just the quiet realization that existence itself is fragile and survival is often unnoticed. That quiet survival did not bring celebration. There were no songs about it, no stories passed down clearly from that time. Only faint traces remained, buried deep in the human story. For the people living then, life simply continued. One day followed another. One season slowly replaced the last. They did not know they had passed through a narrow opening in time. They did not know how close the world had come to becoming silent of human footsteps. They only knew the simple rhythm of waking, moving, resting, and sleeping again. As the climate softened even slightly, the land responded. Plants returned to places that had been empty. Animals followed new but steadier paths. Water flowed more predictably through familiar valleys. Humans noticed these changes not with excitement, but with quiet relief. Food became a little easier to find. Journeys became slightly shorter. The pressure eased, though it never disappeared completely. Groups began to linger longer in the same places. Temporary shelters slowly turned into repeated camps. Paths were walked again and again, pressing faint lines into the land. These were not settlements yet, just places that felt safer than others, places remembered not by name, but by familiarity. Knowledge moved quietly between people, not through writing, not through teaching as we know it, but through watching, copying, and repeating what worked. A way of shaping stone, a way of preparing food, a way of waiting through cold nights. Children grew within these patterns. They did not know the earlier scarcity. They learned a world that felt fragile but no longer collapsing. Still, danger had not vanished. It had only stepped back. Illness returned in waves, not large enough to erase everyone, but enough to remind them that nothing was guaranteed. Weather shifted again and again. Some years were kind, others tested patience. The difference now was balance. Loss no longer outweighed survival. Human presence, once barely noticeable, slowly became steadier, not louder, not dominant, just more consistent. Fires burned in more places at night. Smoke rose from multiple valleys instead of just one. Footsteps crossed paths instead of disappearing into them. This slow recovery did not feel like progress. It felt like stability. And stability allowed something subtle to happen. Humans began to change the land around them, not intentionally, but through repetition. Paths widened, fields were cleared naturally through repeated use, certain plants were favored, protected, carried. Seeds moved with people, not deliberately, but unknowingly. Over time, plants grew where humans often rested. Food became slightly more predictable. This predictability changed behavior. Movement slowed. Groups stayed longer. Memories deepened. The world felt less hostile, though never safe. Even then, the population remained small compared to the vastness around it. Humans did not dominate landscapes. They blended into them. They learned when to move and when to stay, when to rest and when to wait, when to abandon a place and when to return. The near disappearance of humanity did not sharpen people into warriors. It softened them into adapters. Strength mattered less than awareness. Speed mattered less than timing. The survivors were those who noticed small changes, a shift in wind, a change in animal behavior, a pattern in seasons. Life continued through attention rather than force. Generations passed quietly. Names changed, faces blurred, but habits remained. The memory of extreme scarcity faded first, then the memory of constant danger. What remained was caution, built into behavior without explanation. People stayed alert without fear, prepared without urgency. As centuries moved on, humans spread slowly across wider regions, not in waves, not in conquest, but through steady presence. Each new place was tested gently, stayed in carefully, left if it demanded too much. The earth, vast and patient, allowed this slow expansion, and because it was slow, it lasted. The story of near extinction never became a warning told aloud. It became something quieter, a shape pressed into human behavior itself, a tendency to adapt, a tendency to share, a tendency to endure. Even today, traces of that time remain, not in memory, not in myth, but in the way humans respond to uncertainty. The instinct to gather, the instinct to wait, the instinct to keep going without needing reassurance. Those instincts were formed when humanity was thin, fragile, and close to silence. They were not designed, they were inherited. The world that followed grew louder over time. More people, more movement, more change. But beneath all of it, the quiet rhythm remained. The rhythm of survival without drama, of continuation without announcement. And so humanity moved forward, unaware of how narrow the path once was, unaware of how easily the story could have ended before it truly began. The near disappearance dissolved into deep time. No monument marked it, no ending confirmed it. Only the fact that humans continued at all stands as evidence, not as conquerors of the earth, but as participants within it, still fragile, still dependent, still moving softly through a world much larger than themselves. As humans continued to move through the land, something quiet but important began to change inside them. Not suddenly, not consciously, but slowly, shaped by repetition and memory. Survival stopped feeling temporary and began to feel possible. Days no longer felt borrowed. Nights no longer felt uncertain every time the fire dimmed. People began to expect tomorrow, not confidently but gently. This expectation changed behavior. Tools were made with more care, shelters were repaired instead of abandoned, paths were remembered and returned to. The idea of staying began to exist alongside the habit of moving. Still, the land remained unpredictable. Long periods of calm were interrupted by sudden difficulty. A season of steady food could be followed by scarcity without warning. Rivers shifted, herds altered their routes. Cold returned unexpectedly, but humans had learned something subtle during their near disappearance. They had learned not to panic. When conditions worsened, they did not rush blindly. They reduced movement, they conserved energy, they waited. Waiting became a skill, a form of strength. While other species depended on speed or power, humans depended on timing. Knowing when not to move mattered as much as knowing when to go. This patience allowed them to survive conditions that would have erased a less flexible presence. Over time, groups began to recognize patterns, not exact predictions, but tendencies. Certain valleys stayed warmer. Certain slopes held snow longer. Certain rivers flooded gently instead of violently. These observations were not written or spoken clearly. They were absorbed, passed through behavior rather than language. Children learned where to step by watching where adults stepped. They learned when to be silent by sensing tension in the group. Knowledge lived in motion, posture, rhythm. As population slowly increased, interactions between groups became more common. Meetings were cautious, sometimes friendly, sometimes tense, but rarely violent. Conflict was costly. Loss could not be replaced easily. Cooperation offered better odds than confrontation. Sharing information mattered more than claiming territory. A warning about harsh land ahead, a sign that animals had moved east, a memory of a place where water stayed even in dry years. These quiet exchanges strengthened survival more than dominance ever could. Still, there were setbacks. Illness returned in cycles. Not the same sickness each time, but familiar enough to be feared. Some waves passed lightly, others took many. Each time, population thinned slightly, then recovered slowly. The pattern repeated. Loss followed by balance. Balance followed by cautious growth. Humanity moved forward, not in a straight line, but in a careful rhythm. Forward, pause, forward, wait, always adjusting. Over long stretches of time, this rhythm shaped human nature itself. A tendency to hedge against loss, to prepare quietly, to keep options open. The near extinction was no longer a memory, but it had become an influence. The world gradually warmed further. Ice retreated from some regions. New land opened, grasslands expanded, forests shifted. Humans followed these changes slowly, testing each new space with patience. Migration was no longer desperate. It became exploratory, but still cautious. Groups sent small numbers ahead. If the land supported them, others followed. If not, they returned without shame. Survival was not about pride, it was about continuation. As humans spread, they did not erase the world around them, they adapted to it. Tools evolved quietly, stone shapes refined. Fire use became more controlled. Clothing improved subtly. Each improvement was small, almost invisible within a single lifetime, but powerful across generations. The population grew but remained thin. The earth still felt larger than humanity. Silence still dominated most landscapes. Nights were still dark, stars still overwhelming. Humans remained aware, at least instinctively, that they were guests rather than rulers. This awareness shaped restraint. They took what was needed, not what was possible. Excess had little value and movement was always an option. Stability remained more important than accumulation. Even as time passed and skills improved, humans stayed vulnerable. A series of bad seasons could still reverse progress. A new illness could still thin numbers dramatically. Nothing felt permanent. This uncertainty prevented complacency. Attention remained sharp, adaptation remained constant, and slowly, quietly, humans became resilient, not because they were strong, but because they were careful. The story of humanity did not accelerate yet, it settled. It learned how to exist without urgency, how to persist without forcing the world to bend. This long period of balance did not produce monuments or myths, it produced habits, and habits repeated over thousands of years became culture, still soft, still flexible, still aware of fragility. The near disappearance remained hidden behind this calm. No one told the story because no one remembered it clearly, but the shape of it remained, pressed into behavior, into instinct, into the quiet decisions made each day.